So now that we have seen supply and demand, we can now look at the models that we have to look at what is going on, how companies behave in different situations, in different environments. And the first one is this competitive model, the perfectly competitive model, where our assumptions are very clear. We assume free markets dictate what people want and what companies produce. They're not being told what to consume. They're not being told what to produce. They're just responding to the market forces as they see fit. We don't have one specific individual, excuse me, we don't have one individual dictating what someone should produce and what prices they should charge. And so what I'm saying is that we don't have a government telling us what to charge, or we don't have a single firm dominating the market telling everyone how much they need to pay for something. We don't have that. So in a perfectly competitive market, we have many buyers and many sellers. We have a standard homogeneous product, so no variations in the product. Resources are mobile, so for example, workers, they can work in the production of something, but if something changes, they can easily and quickly shift to the production of something else. And finally, perfect information, so non-asymmetric. All the information that is relevant is available to everyone. Everyone knows what they want. Everyone knows the production. Everyone knows the prices. Perfect information. You know everything there is to know about the product. And ultimately, each firm will produce the amount that benefits the most, and that amount is going to be dictated by this idea that we discussed earlier of marginal benefit equals marginal cost. That's the economic optimization. That's how they're going to optimize profit, by choosing to produce the quantity where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. So this is our first model, the perfectly competitive model. We will later relax some of these assumptions to create different models. Because yes, you're probably thinking, I don't know, how often do we see this? I think we do, but not always. But again, we'll have different models for that. So let's take a look at this perfectly competitive model. So on the left side, we have the market as a whole. That's why I have supply and demand. Supply and demand on this chart, that represents every supplier and every consumer. S&D, supply and demand, that's the entire market is represented. And when you put it together, the entire market dictates that this market is going to produce Q quantity at price P0. Okay? Now, on the right side, I have a single firm, just one firm. But one firm, so if you think about this graph, if you had a microscope, would be somewhere in this line, right? Actually, well, I can tell you it will be that line right there. This is one firm that is part of this entire supply, just one. And that's what we're looking at. How would this firm behave in this market? So what we do is we take the price from the left side and we draw, we continue that line, the dotted line, we just keep drawing it across. All right? And that line, which is the price over here, when it comes to this side, when it gets to this chart, instead of being just a dotted line for price, it turns into demand. It turns into marginal revenue. Okay? So for the firm in a competitive model, for a perfectly competitive model, for the firm, the price that is dictated by the market is the demand, is the marginal revenue, meaning the firm is more than free to supply whatever it wants to supply at that price. So for that firm, the demand only exists at that price. This firm will not see other demand at other prices. They only see the demand at that price. Because if this firm chooses to charge more for its products, it just won't sell them because there are other producers and sellers. and it will just go out of business. So that's why that line turns into a D line and is no longer dotted. This is a real line where demand equals marginal revenue equals price. And marginal revenue, why? Because that's how much this firm is going to collect in revenue for every unit they sell, right? They could sell 1 unit, 20, 30, 40, or a million. They're always going to get the exact same amount of money because that's dictated by the market on the left side. Good. So we have that D. Then we're going to draw the marginal cost. And the marginal cost is, well, first it starts somewhere higher and then it starts to go down, economies of scale, all kinds of things. I am I am not telling you the entire story. I'm just telling you like what you need to know. But there's so much more to this, right? But the marginal cost keeps going higher and higher and higher as the firm is producing more and more and more. It needs to move resources from other places, needs to compete for those resources from other places, so they need to keep adding a higher cost to their production. So for example, think about this. For example, to get to that point, they need to hire more and more workers, more skilled workers perhaps, who are probably doing something else. So they need to bid for them. They need to take them away from that other thing into this thing, into the production of this thing. And when I say workers, I could also say lumber, steel, flour, if you're a bakery, right? You need to move you need to bid away the bakery to make donuts, if this is the market for donuts, away from bread, right? For example. So the cost, the marginal cost is going to keep going higher and higher and higher as your quantity increases. And at some point, your marginal cost is going to hit the marginal revenue. That's the point where you're going to produce Q. So you're going to produce Q, which is, you pick that number, right? But it's obviously, you pick it, but it's given to you by the concept of marginal revenue equals marginal cost, marginal benefit, marginal revenue. And then you're going to charge that price, which is given to you by the market. Now, we also believe that any firm, so why do we have the average cost there? And how come the average cost, how come the marginal cost and the marginal revenue meet right at the very bottom, at the absolute minimum of the average cost? Because we need to assume that, this is an assumption that we make, it should be true, that for any firm to compete in a perfectly competitive market and to exist and to survive in this market, that should happen where the average cost per unit is at its lowest. If that is not true, if the average cost at that point is higher, like say that this the average cost curve hit this point, around here at the high, that means that that firm has a very high cost of production. That firm is not efficient. That firm is not competitive, and it will just leave the market. It will be wiped out of the market as not being efficient. So only the strongest will survive in a perfectly competitive market. That's why we have the average cost there. Okay? And that was a perfectly competitive market. But what happens when someone or something starts manipulating the market for some reason or another, whatever that is? What if they start manipulating the market and the prices are no longer a reflection of what is going on, but something that is artificial, something that is created in a dark basement? I'm just kidding. Someone imposes a limit on the price, and we're going to have limits above it and below it. So we start with below it, a price ceiling. Okay, so say that the price equilibrium is PE, QE right there, right? So this is the amount of goods and services that the suppliers and the consumers would like to consume and supply. It's right there. But let's say for whatever reason that we impose a price ceiling at PC right there. Well, if that's true, so we draw that dotted line, right? If that's imposed, suppliers will only supply this much, and consumers will want to consume this much. Unfortunately, because that's the price, this is how much is being produced, even though this is how much they're willing to consume. So what we have is a shortage. There's not enough to satisfy the population. There's a reduced availability of these goods. We have many cases. This would be rent control. When you impose rent control, prices do go down, but availability, the production is going to go down because suppliers, in the case of rent control, would be landlords, will not supply to the market because it's just not worth it to them. So there will be less amount, in this case, it will be less apartments out there for the public. So in essence, the public as a whole is worse off because only this amount is going to be supplied. But if you let the market do its thing, yes, prices will be higher, and I'm not gonna get into that. But then people that cannot afford it, that's a different story. I'm just talking about the facts here. But if you let the prices go, then there will be higher quantity of apartments, and there will be more people in apartments as opposed to less people, which is QS. In healthcare, price ceilings will manifest. So when this happens, and we impose price ceilings in healthcare, it will manifest in longer waits, delays, limited access to high-tech radiology, equipment, and so on. Ultimately, this is a deterioration of care. We'll have lower quality, less care, and lower quality of care if you're imposing this type of restrictions in the market. You're not letting the market do its thing. And of course, we have the opposite, a price floor, where you're not allowed to charge a price below the price ceiling, which is right here, right? In that case, consumers want to consume QT, suppliers want to supply QS. So now we have a surplus. Suppliers are pumping and pumping units of whatever this is, but the consumers don't want them because they're too high. The price is too high, right, compared to the equilibrium price. So we create a surplus. And as I mentioned before, the surplus could be wiped out if allowed. If you are allowed, I don't know if you are allowed, it could be wiped out with discounts and all types of things. But the result is similar. In meaning people are not going to be happy. Not everyone is going to be happy. If you let the prices reach equilibrium, you will have a balance in happiness. But if you don't, here, right, we are going to end up with less off. You see, QT here is less than QE. Yeah, that's because consumers are now consuming less. So for example, if you say that a vaccine is $100 and the government says, no, it's not $100, it's going to be $120 because I say so. Well, consumers were consuming QE before, but now when you raise the price, they're going to consume less. So that's also going to deteriorate our healthcare system. That's going to result in very similar issues because there's less money going. There's less there's less production, less activity, I should say, not production. There's less activity in the system by not letting the market dictate what should be consumed and at what price. A tax is very similar to a price ceiling, but it's different because we introduce the figure of tax revenue the government is collecting. So let's look at an excise tax, and I think here, I am not going to explain a sales tax. I don't remember why. I think because the author doesn't do it, but we could absolutely do it. It's not a big deal. If you have a question, just let me know. An excise tax, right? An excise tax is a tax that is imposed on the supplier instead of on the consumer. The supplier is going to pay that tax as they produce each additional unit. So when you do that, when you impose a tax on the supplier, it's not just a change in the price. As we talked about before, a change in price would just be a move along the curve. You're changing the structure of the production. You are adding cost to the production. So the supply is going to shift to the left. It's going to be reduced. And when it gets reduced, as you can see, it's going to reach a new equilibrium. So the first equilibrium was A. You impose the excise tax. Now the suppliers are paying this tax. So now the supply curve shifts to the left to B. And it reaches a new equilibrium. Okay? And yes, everyone is happy because there's an equilibrium, there's no surpluses or shortages, but they could be happier. They could be at A, where there was more quantity produced and lower prices. I mean, lower prices, more quantity. Well, who doesn't want that? Well, well, I was gonna say something. So where is this? What happened here? Who took this benefit? Well, that's the government. The government took the benefit. The difference is now tax revenue. They took the tax revenue out of this. That's what the difference is. And I have here all the areas for you to look at of where that came from. But basically, the government is now collecting this area right here. Okay, is collecting the tax times the quantity that is imposing the tax on. And that's government revenue. Now, those pro-taxes will say yes, but that tax revenue is reinvested back into the economy. So this is not a loss because it's injected back. Okay, and an economist would agree to. I would agree with that. I mean, technically, I completely disagree with that because 100% of the tax is not going to be injected back. A very small amount of that tax is actually going to be injected back. My biggest problem, the thing that bothers economists, is this triangle right here, the BAC, the Bermuda Triangle right here. I just made that up. It's not called the Bermuda Triangle, but this triangle right here is what we call a dead weight loss. This BCA, that triangle represents the value of benefit that we would have got from producing QE versus QT, because that's not being produced. So you can say that, well, if we tax, the tax revenue is reinvested into society, so who cares? Well, we care because the consumption goes down, the production goes down, the consumption goes down, and those units that are not being produced and consumed, that was benefit to our society. That's gone. You lost that. That is, you cannot recover that. Well, unless you remove the tax, of course. So welfare implications. And I just introduced you to this idea of welfare implications. So what is welfare? I mean, most of you usually use the word welfare. The word welfare means something, but to an economist, welfare means what it means. Welfare is the overall satisfaction of society as a whole. Okay, not just one sector in one particular segment of our society. No, we're talking about the whole group as a group. How are we? Are we better off or worse off? And when there is a tax, there is no question to an economist that there is a huge welfare implication. That is, there's a deterioration of welfare. The entire society as a whole, again, as a whole, is worse off, because we are trading consumer surplus and producer surplus, which is the enjoyment that we get from the production. We are transferring it to the government, which gets some things happen there. But more importantly, we lose it to this idea of the dead weight loss. That's gone. Here's the little, basically what I'm doing is I'm just taking that and making it bigger. This consumer surplus and producer surplus, this is the benefit that we get when we pay less than what we were willing to, or when we produce and sell for more than what we're willing to. Is that extra satisfaction that we get from consumption and production. So for example, if you're down here, right? Say that you are willing to consume and pay this price up here, okay? A much higher price. Yeah, but the price in the market is PO. So say, for example, that you want to buy an avocado and you're willing to pay For one avocado, you're willing to pay $5. Let's say it's up here, right? Well, but it doesn't matter that you're willing to pay $5 if you go to the market and it's $1, because that price is going to be determined by the market forces. When we go to the supermarket, we all pay the same price, PO. Yeah, but I'm willing to pay $5, but I'm only going to pay PO. Well, the difference between those two, which is this triangle here, right, is the area above the price and below the demand curve, is consumer surplus. It's like extra satisfaction that I get from consuming that good. Same thing for producers, but it will be the opposite. The producer surplus will be the difference, the area between the PO and the supply curve. Because these producers here would be willing to produce at much lower prices, as you can see, dictated by the supply. But the market says, no, you can sell a PO. Oh, great. That's extra benefit. That's kind of like, you can think of it as profit, if you will. So now we go into our second model, imperfect competition. And this is what's going to dictate basically all the other models that we're going to look at. So we looked at perfect competition, and I'm sure some of you were like, I'm not so sure you can find perfection. And I will disagree. I think I've seen it. I think I see it all the time. But what about imperfect competition? What if we take some of those assumptions out? What would happen? Well, we will have imperfect competition. And there's going to be different degrees of imperfect competition. Because once you go into, see, that's the thing. When it's perfect, it's perfect. But when you go into imperfect competition, anything can happen. That imperfection may come from many different sources. And we're going to look at them. But bottom line, what is an imperfect competition market? Well, that would be one where there are too few firms or not enough buyers. The product is not standard. So if you think, for example, soda, drinks, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, this is like, everyone talks about this. Is are Coca-Cola and Pepsi homogeneous product or not, right? If you guys were with me in the classroom, you would be like rolling your eyes, like absolutely not. Coke is better, Pepsi is better, whatever. But to me, it's actually the same thing. Well, honestly, to me, it is the same thing because I don't drink either one. So, because I don't drink soda, it's the same thing that I try to avoid. But I get it. Sometimes products are different, and actually, we could go into this, but that's how you make a big profit out of a product, is by making it different than the others, right? By differentiating your product, so you're not competing in a perfect competitive market. You are in an imperfect competitive market where you are the only one producing that particular good. So that's what Coke and Coca-Cola do with marketing, etc. Barriers to entry. We could impose barriers to enter this market. The higher the barriers, the less perfect, the more imperfect, right? If you start forcing companies to have all types of licenses and requirements, well, that makes it difficult to play in this market. Well, that's going to reduce the number of firms. That's imperfect, and so on. And that's I focus on the supply side, but there's also on the demand side, we have also imperfections. We may not have enough buyers. Try selling a car where there are only a few people that will be interested in that car. Try selling a fairly new purple Mercedes, Mercedes-Benz. Good luck with that. I bet you're not going to find that many people willing to buy a purple Mercedes. My apologies to any of you who have a purple Mercedes, and the reason why I'm telling you why I came up with that example, because that is a true example that I happen to know about. I didn't have it, no, I bought it, but I know the story. It could happen. Imperfect information. Sometimes consumers don't have all the information. Just think about when you are online doing your shopping, how many ways do you utilize to get to the right information, right? Oh, I'm gonna look on Yelp, TripAdvisor, I'm going to look at the reviews on Amazon, I'm going to do this, right? You're trying to get to perfect information, but it's so hard because in reality, a lot of times there's imperfect information. right? But you're trying to get around that by making it perfect. And that's why to buy a $10 toothbrush, you spend 6 hours researching the internet. Makes no sense. You know you do it, and I do it as well. So our first model in imperfect competition is going to be the monopoly. And we are of course we are not covering every single model because this is not a class in microeconomics. As I mentioned before, we're really covering in 2 chapters in 1 week. We're covering half a semester of microeconomics. So obviously we're not going to go into every detail. But here we have the monopoly, right? We all know what a monopoly. We all think what a monopoly should be, but in simple terms, a monopoly is what? Is a single producer of a product or service, right? Either you buy it from this firm, or you just don't have it. You don't consume it, right? So we're talking about the imperfection here is the number of sellers, producers. There's only one producer or seller. So we call these price searchers, price makers, because in reality, now that the monopoly is the single supplier, they are the ones dictating prices. Their actions dictate the price. Not quite, we'll get to it, but they are part of the market, yeah, but the price is not being dictated by the multiple suppliers. It's really only dictated by this supplier, the only supplier, the monopoly. So how does that look? Well, notice, so this is a single firm, right? This is a single firm, a single monopoly looking at the market. For a monopoly, the demand curve is going to be it's going to be downward sloping. Now, remember, I'm going to go back for a second, right? Remember here, in a perfectly competitive market, the single firm faces a flat demand curve? Yeah, because to them, either you sell at that price or you don't sell at all. But the monopoly is facing a downward sloping, meaning they're facing the entire market because they're the only seller of this product or producer. They're facing the entire market. That's why they're facing the entire downward sloping D curve, meaning for the monopoly to sell more quantity, they have to lower prices. For the perfectly competitive market, they can't change the price. That is not up to them because that's the market dictating. But in this case, the monopoly is a price maker. They can dictate the price. But when people say, oh, the monopoly can charge anything they want, yes, sure they can. But that doesn't mean that they can make any amount of profit they want. That's something that I think people mean profit, but they're saying price. They cannot just say, oh, I'm going to charge $1 million per avocado. Well, that's just stupid because they won't sell any avocados, right? But they can dictate the price, but the higher the price, the lower amount they're going to supply. The lower the price, the more amount they're going to be able to sell to the market. Okay? So they are price makers, but they're facing the demand curve. Okay, so we got that. Then we have the marginal revenue and the marginal cost. Now, notice the marginal revenue with a perfectly competitive market. I'm going to go back. Your D equals your MR. Every unit that you sell, you collect the exact same amount of money. So if you're selling avocados, if you sell 2 avocados, you collect $1 per avocado. If you sell another avocado, you get another $1. If you sell another avocado, up to 4, it's another $1. It doesn't change. The marginal revenue does not change. However, for the monopoly, it sure does. Because the more quantity they produce and sell, the prices are going down. So every extra unit they sell, they lose. They lose. The price goes down, so they lose revenue, right? As the price goes down. So that's why it's down. And the marginal cost is the same for a perfectly competitive, for a non-perfectly competitive. The marginal cost just has to do with production. Okay, so now we have our 3 curves. So how does the monopoly know what is efficient, how much to charge? Simple, because we only have one rule. You've only heard me of one rule, where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. With the marginal revenue, benefit and revenue will be the same. With the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost, which is that point right there, right? That's where they're going to set the production. So they say, okay, where my marginal revenue equals my marginal cost, which is right there, that's how much I'm going to produce, QO. And at QO, now so I go down first and then I'm going to go back up. For QO, the market is willing to pay PO. So that's the price. That's how I dictate the price. That's how monopoly dictates the price. They first, using the rule marginal revenue equals marginal cost, they set the quantity first, QO, and then they look up to the demand curve to see, okay, how much are people willing to pay for QO? PO. Okay, so that's it. That's the market. Okay? So what is so bad about monopolies? Well, the problem with the monopolies is that if we broke down this, if there were more producers, sellers in this market, they wouldn't be able to do this. And basically, they will be producing a much higher amount of goods because because of competition, right? Competition will kick in, prices will go down, right? The P starts to go down, and you will end up around here with a much higher quantity and much lower price. That's why monopolies are bad, because they restrict quantity and they increase price. Do we see this in the healthcare market? I don't know. I should probably have a lawyer. I think at this point I should have a lawyer next to me from now on, because something tells me I'm going to be saying a lot of bad things. You could. And I'm not saying I have MGH here. I'm not saying that MGH is a monopoly. I didn't say that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you could have a healthcare system, like a hospital, or you could have a pharmaceutical company with one drug that acts like a monopoly, because for whatever reason, they can set the prices. They can control the quantity and they can set the prices, because either there are very few buyers or sellers. There are very few buyers. Because there are very few sellers. There's very little competition, or perhaps their product is different. But let me walk away from this MGH. The fact that I mentioned MGH. Think about a remote area of the country where there's only one hospital, so there's no competition. Well, that hospital is actually acting as a monopoly in that area, so they can truly control prices. So we're going to see that, and perhaps some of you don't like the idea of talking about monopolies in the healthcare market, but we sure have them, and we sure talk about them because our government, our state government, deals with this all the time. The Massachusetts government has stopped multiple mergers because of this, and it has happened.